So we're going to get started, but I'm just going to give everybody one last reminder because we have a couple more people on. So if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, you can either put a comment in the comment section with your email, and Julie will get you the PowerPoint. Or if you just want to go ahead and private message us, you can also do that, and we'll get you the PowerPoint. Also, if you want to go ahead and send any questions you might have, because you already have some concerns about sensory issues, then go ahead and send them to us. We're going to go ahead and kind of work through the PowerPoint. I don't want it to be just me just straight out lecturing at you, so I'd love to hear some questions as you have them. So feel free to send them in as we go. But we are going to go ahead and get started, I think, because it's about 5:35, so it's perfect time. And we're going to talk about sensory solution. So, and just bear with us. This is the first time around. We might have some technical glitches, but let us know if you have any trouble seeing the PowerPoint, because there should be something up right now that says sensory solution of West Virginia Autism Training Center. So we're going to talk about a couple different things today. We're going to talk about how the sensory system is involved with behavior and learning and how those all interact. We're also going to talk about the importance of self-regulation and how sensory strategies can really help everyone, including all of us. And we'll talk about some good examples. And then we'll also talk about developing some proactive strategies from that sensory-based perspective. All right, so just a couple basics. Some people might already know this, and I apologize if you do. But one thing that's really important to always keep in mind is there is always a function behind behavior. Sometimes it's to get something or obtain something. This could vary from attention, or it could be like tangible, like a toy or food, or it could be sensory. And we're going to focus a lot today on sensory. But then we also need to keep in mind sometimes the function behavior might be to escape things. So it might also be that we want to avoid attention. It might be that we want to avoid activities, especially like some kind of school assignment or some kind of sensory stimulation. And again, that's what we're going to be focusing on. But we have to keep in mind those functions of behavior when we're exploring. So individuals, whether they're on the autism spectrum or not, could be an individual who seeks certain sensory input, avoids certain sensory input, and it can actually end up being that certain individuals might avoid input like auditory, but they might seek out tactile. So you can also be very mixed in that realm. So I think everybody, for the most part, kind of knows the 5 general senses that we usually talk about. So it's visual, auditory, tactile, taste, and smell. But there's 2 that are really important, especially I found with a lot of individuals I work with that are on the spectrum that we don't normally talk about. And these are vestibular and proprioceptive. So they're really big words, and I think also sound very confusing. But in general, what vestibular is related to gravity. And so you find this with like movement and balance. Someone who might be really sensitive in the vestibular realm might not like swinging or rocking or kind of laying back, or somebody who really seeks this out might love like swinging really high on the bars. Whereas proprioceptive is a little bit more tricky, I think, to understand. It's basically where your body is in space, and it kind of has to do with your joints. So sometimes we see kids that have proprioceptive issues that might be a little bit more clumsy and tend to bump into people because they might be a little bit less aware of where their body is in space. So I'm just going to check in real quick. Are we good? No questions?
Yep, we had one request and I sent it out.
Okay.
I did email it to her, so.
So if anybody has any questions, like again, feel free to send them in as we go.
And if you want to remind them if they want to send their email, because we have some people jumped in.
Okay.
I can email.
So we do have a couple new people that jumped in. So just as a quick reminder, if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, feel free to either put your email in the comment section, or feel free to send us a private message with your email address so we can get that out to you. And again, if you have any questions, just go ahead and let them roll in as we're going through, because I'd rather answer them as we go rather than waiting to the end sometimes. Okay, so when we talk about sensory issues, we're going to talk about two different realms. The first one we're going to talk about is people that might be a little hypersensitive, so they're over responsive. The one I always think about for myself, at least, is when I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but when you're in a room and the AC kicks on and like all you can hear is that booming AC in the background, it's completely distracting from what you're trying to pay attention to, whether it's your boss giving you instructions or just trying to follow a teacher whenever they're trying to teach you. Whenever you're over responsive and hypersensitive, that is so loud it can completely kind of distract you from what everybody else can normally attend to. In fact, I have one client that is so hypersensitive auditorily right now that he already knows exactly what time he needs to leave the school to avoid hearing the end of the day bell, because it's so jarring and overwhelming for him that it's too overwhelming for him to handle. So that's a good example probably of the hypersensitive. And all the senses, when we talk about this, we're talking about all the senses, not just the auditory. We might even have, I think we have some good examples here. So we talked about the auditory, but tactily, we might see some kiddos that are very hyper responsive to touch. So you might particularly have to be worried about approaching them from behind and touching them, because they just might be so responsive, overly responsive, I'm sorry, to touch. And this also might be our kiddos that really struggle with clothing and textures. This could be, especially, that's why the tagless clothes is such a good strategy now for some of those kiddos. We've seen, we have plenty of kiddos also that have trouble with different tastes. So this could be textures of food. It could be the temperature of the food. This might also involve partly like some smell. And so we have like an overly responsive gag reflex. And then again, like we mentioned, the smell. And I can actually think of one client in particular I had who was so overly sensitive to the smell of meat that he couldn't even eat in the cafeteria because he was just so sensitive. He would gag and eventually just get sick if he had to eat in the cafeteria. And just like I said, along with the same other senses, when it comes to visual, might be that the light is too bright, might be really sensitive to reflection. And then we're going to get into the two that are more tricky that we don't normally hear about. So the proprioceptive and those that are more those are the more hypersensitive with proprioceptive. We might then try to avoid touches with others, like seem really uncoordinated, kind of lethargic and lazy. And vestibular, they might be very sensitive to like spinning motions, swinging motions, even something like riding a bike. We're going to go ahead and move into the opposite, which is the hyposensitive. And these are individuals that are under responsive. And again, I just kind of want to remind everybody, when I say individuals that are hyposensitive, I don't mean they're hyposensitive in every realm sensory wise. It might be that they're hypersensitive in some and hyposensitive in others. So it doesn't mean that most individuals aren't exactly one or the other. Sometimes they might be mixed. Before I get into this, are we good to go?
Oh, yeah.
All right. I guess
somebody did ask if they could share it, and yes, please.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So somebody asked if they could share, and so we said yes. Feel free to go ahead and share the PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to get into under responsive. These are individuals that might be seeking out a lot of sensory input. They might need a lot of energy and stimulation, especially whenever I think about sometimes whenever I might be in an all-day training, or even whenever I'm training myself, which I can't believe I don't have a pen in my hand, I need to constantly have a little bit of stimulation in order to kind of keep my energy levels up. So these are our individuals, especially they might need to kind of get up and move around a little bit in order to keep their attention where it needs to be, especially during a long school day. Um, so what it might look like. Um, Whenever we're just going to go right down the list here. When it comes to auditory, it might be an individual that doesn't seem to respond to sound very well. You might worry that like there's some trouble with hearing even. When it comes to the tactile sense, they might kind of ignore touch or even seem unaware of injuries. And I think also what you might see with these kiddos that are hyposensitive with the tactile is they might even grab people or grab objects a little bit more strongly because they're a little bit unaware um, of their of that touch reflex. Then also we might have taste. Individuals that might be hyposensitive when it comes to taste, they might really seek out um, tastes that are specifically really flavorful, really sour, even really sweet or spicy. Um, when it comes to smell, we might I think we've had a couple kiddos that really seem to prefer to uh, go around smelling people or behaviors that seem a little strange because they're seeking out that smell, seeking out that strong input that way. And then so then we also have the visual. So individuals that are hyposensitive with the visual, they might not respond very quickly to objects, or they might even seem to like stare and prefer a lot of visual input. So um, I think of a couple of clients I've had where they might really prefer to um, watch the fan spinning, um, prefer to uh, bring things up in front of them and let them fall in front of their face because they're seeking out that visual stimuli. And then the last two, again, the trickier, the proprioceptive. Somebody who might be hyposensitive, these are the ones I was speaking about earlier that might be a little bit more clumsy. So they might be running into people, just really have a lower awareness of where they're at in space compared to other people and bump into people a lot. And when it comes to the vestibular, which again is kind of the gravity, and they might be the ones that are really seeking jumping on the trampoline, swinging as high as possible on the swing set, kind of maybe your more daredevil kiddos with the vestibular when they're hyposensitive. Okay, and I apologize. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to read this quite as well because I did not bring my glasses with me, but I really do love this graphic. This graphic is a really great one to help you kind of understand all of the different ways that the hypo and hypersensitivities can work well, work across the different sensory systems. So I guess we'll just start maybe in the middle. I have difficulty dressing myself, and go across the way where it says, I can, sorry, um, I can, oh yeah, haircuts, thank you.
Touching others.
Yeah, I touch others. So I can walk on my tiptoe. Actually, walking in tiptoes, that's a big one. I'm glad that this graphic brought it up. That's one sometimes that we can see a lot. And I pour fine motor skill. Oh, that's another big one. Especially, when it comes to handwriting and fine motor skills, we actually kind of can see it easily both ways. Sometimes handwriting is so light or just very poor because there's not enough um, there's not enough feedback tactily. to respond. And sometimes we also get our kiddos that will grind the pencil like into the paper and and like almost break the tip off constantly because they just don't have enough feedback tactily or even proprioceptively when trying to use crayons and use are there any others, Julie?
Smelling.
Yes. um Smelling.
Other
I
people,
like to smell other
objects, or
people
food. Yeah.
objects. Yes.
I like to wear the
Or
same clothes or shoes, regardless of weather.
yeah, I'm thinking of somebody in particular. But I can even relate to some of the like I think all of us do have some of those issues.
Hmm.
Like we can recognize sensory because um when it comes to fabric softener, I am a anti-fabric softener person at my house, and my mother insists on it because I have dogs and she thinks that my dog blankets need washed in fabric. But we do all experience some some sensitivities or lack of sensitivities.
One of
And
the
so
women watching said that her child only likes white foods.
black
So
or white
yes, so
foods.
that's yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is okay. And so like but like likes both of them but
Yep,
not
color
other
food.
colors.
Yeah, maybe even different textures, but he has to stay with the same thing, same color.
That is in it. Do we have some more picky eat like anybody else out there with picky eaters? Because I feel like um, that would definitely be something that would come up in this
Yeah.
conversation. And it's interesting. Like I feel like sometimes the picky eaters are really hard. It's hard to kind of figure out what's going on because sometimes it's more texture, sometimes it's more taste, sometimes it's both. And so I will kind of throw out there and suggest like if you can, sometimes it's nice to find like a feeding clinic or like a some place that does feeding evaluations, so you can kind of narrow down those issues because I know picky eating can be something that is a challenge that persists and can be really aggravating for families. So, okay, is there
Yeah.
anything else before we move on?
Nope.
All right. Okay, so this is my favorite, I think, part to talk about when it comes to sensory issues is that um, we
All right, go ahead.
that's okay. We're just keeping our tech in check right now. Um, so when it comes to sensory issues, a lot of times we have to like process it through the idea that we all have certain arousal states. And I keep coming back to this, and I guess it's just my main example. But when I'm in a training, especially for like an all day training or a long meeting, I'm always monitoring like where I'm at arousal level. Because there's sometimes, that you're really running high, especially if you're coming in like highly caffeinated. If I have two teas from Starbucks, like I'm just bouncing off the walls. But as the morning kind of goes on and it drags on, like sometimes, your engine level gets kind of low and you really need to find something to kind of keep you ramped up so you can keep your attention level where it needs to be. Some silly things like either I do or I see people do all the time. The worst one for me is whenever people jiggle their leg, just because that will affect my arousal level because it's distracting. But I click my pen all the time. I know that's very distracting for other people. And so, when we think about this, we all have kind of this engine, and it's either running right where it needs to be, or sometimes it's running a little too fast and we need to kind of calm it down, or sometimes it's running a little too low and we need to bring it up a little in order to be able to pay attention um, whenever we need to pay attention. There we go. So there we go. When your engine's running too high, and I'm thinking, I don't know how many kiddos I have that kind of might sometimes need to stand up to do their assignment, and that really kind of helps them because their engine's running a little high. But them just standing up and moving around a little bit might help them, get their engine where it needs to be and be able to do their schoolwork. Um, and then we also have those of us, who are running really low. I do think I probably run low more often than not. Excuse me. Um, but then, excuse me, whenever the problem comes up, and I think this problem comes up often for most of us in general, but also at school, whenever our engines running too high and really our teachers, expecting the kiddos to sit and attend, and they really can't because their engine's just running so high, they're not able to really meet those demands. Or vice versa, your engine's running so low and all you want to do is put your head down on the table, and the teacher really needs you to kind of pay attention and do your schoolwork. So um, the problem that comes in here is, when we have kids that might have some hyper or hyposensitivity issues, across whatever, tactile, auditory, all the different senses, then if we don't pay attention to those, then we're kind of setting them up for failure a little bit in class. So it's really important that we pay attention to that. So self-regulation, that's where this comes in. And I think that's where, I'm not saying I'm the best at it, but my pen clicking or my doodling or, people who kind of might bounce their leg or, um, just find different ways to fidget a little bit or, um, you know, trying to think of other ways that people might regulate. We all kind of oftentimes have found ways by the time we're adults to regulate ourselves and manage without deciding that we're going to jump up and run around the room in order to be able to be ready to pay attention. Sometimes our kiddos struggle with that, and this is where I think different sensory strategies can come into place, and be really helpful. Is helping to develop some self-regulation skills. Um, so where this, like, why this becomes an issue for some kids is there's sometimes whenever the sensory system doesn't develop exactly, the way it does for other peers. And so certain systems might develop a little bit better or a little bit, less, not as quite as well. And whenever the sensory system isn't, um, basically integrating well together, then you have issues where they're kind of conflicting, and that's where it kind of leads to some issues with some self-regulation. So we especially kind of see sensory integration issues with some of our individuals with autism, and um, that's something that's important to address, and I think very easily overlooked, because a lot of times sensory issues kind of feel a little invisible. So, are we still doing good?
We're good. We've had 5 or 6 more people join, so if they
Okay.
want the PowerPoint, have them leave their email. I'll send
Okay.
it out.
So, just as a quick aside, I know we had a couple more people join. So, for all of you newbies, if you're interested and would like the PowerPoint, you can either put your email in the comment section, or you can private message us with your email address, and we'll make sure that we get you the PowerPoint. And also, I guess, we're actually coming pretty close to the end here. We might go pretty quickly through these last slides. So if you have any questions and you kind of want to, ask us anything specifically, go ahead and post them, because we're getting pretty close to the end here. So very quickly, just because we were talking about sensory integration development. So whenever it comes to, just being aware whenever there might be some sensory integration issues. When it comes to infants and toddlers, we might start to be a little bit leery and suspect some sensory integration issues, whenever, you might see the infants or toddler age, maybe seems overly limp or stiff when held, seems to have trouble calming themselves or extremely fussy, and also when we see those problems with eating and sleeping.
We do have one
Okay.
question. Is saying the same word over and over count as self-regulation?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Okay. So the question was, is saying the same word over and over again considered like a way of
Mhm.
self-regulating? Um, I don't, I hate to say maybe, but I feel like that might be what our answer is it's possible. It is a form of self-regulation. So it does depend. Um, it is it's something where you might have to observe it over multiple different situations across, settings with different people, um, just to figure out what the function might be. Because if everybody remembers, like when we go back to the very beginning of what our presentation was, which was about functions of behavior, I could see repeating the same word over and over again could serve multiple functions. So, um, not that we're going to get into data collection today, not that we're going to get into like functions of behavior, but um, that is kind of where that question goes back to, because it could be just something that's really self-soothing. Um, I don't know if anybody else gets them. I'll get a song stuck in my head, and so I think it's called an earworm, right?
Yes.
And it is kind of something that's a little self-soothing for me. Like whenever I'm feeling anxious, it's like to kind of repeat that earworm over and over again. But I could also see how repeating the same word over and over again might be something just to get attention, because if especially I could imagine if somebody's repeating over and over again, it might be aggravating enough to get a really big um, burst of attention from the people around them, depending on how disruptive it is. So that I wish I had a definite answer, but we don't. So it depends, unfortunately. Okay, so we're good to move
Yep.
on. Okay. So just kind of moving into whenever we're thinking about, whether there might be some issues with sensory processing. These are a couple things to look out for the preschoolers. Constantly moving around. Whenever, child's having a hard time like settling down, calming down, or having frequent tantrums. This also sounds like the terrible twos, I feel like, but overly sensitive to smells, lights, or sounds. Maybe is a picky eater, so only eats certain foods. Um, Especially like maybe if like playgrounds or crowds are overwhelming. I'm like that initially or instantly makes me think about. I've had I don't know how many clients that maybe have trouble with fireworks shows, so that could be a red flag when they struggle a lot with like fireworks. Um, and then the last one here is delays in language or motor skills. All right, elementary school years. First of all, I have to point out I love the image, and I don't know if everybody can like see it clearly, but this is I think originally was like a homemade idea for sensory regulation for somebody that was kind of fidgety in their seat, and they're basically like tennis balls cut in half and pasted onto the chair, which just works really well to keep the system activated. So that they're not quite as fidgety in the chair. But so I really love this. But so some of our red flags for sensory processing issues in elementary school might be difficult time with transitions, struggles with social situations, trouble with fine motor activities, um, playing too rough with others, which that kind of goes to the idea that we were thinking with like a proprioceptive maybe issue. Um, and needing some heavy play. Difficulty sitting for long periods of time. And the last one here is overwhelmed by classroom noise, lights, or smells. And that is, I do have to say, I think that comes up a lot. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. It comes up a good deal because the lighting oftentimes might be fluorescent lighting, and if you're hypersensitive when it comes to visual stimuli, you might pick up on flickering fluorescent lights a lot sooner than the rest of us might. And I'm not sure if anybody else has the problem, but I know if you've ever been in a room that you have to be in for 8 hours a day and there's a flickering fluorescent light, you might end up with a horrible migraine and be in like really excruciating pain. Um, so that's important to keep in mind. All right. um, So then again, our red flags for middle school, high school years, acting impulsively might be an issue, something might raise red flags. Easily distracted, doesn't finish tasks or assignments, struggles with personal space. Social situations that might cause anxiety or depressed feelings. Maybe our middle school or high schoolers that might seem lethargic or even have some poor self-esteem. So these are all, possible indicators that there might be some sensory issues going on. Now, the important thing to kind of keep in mind here is, we might be able to somewhat identify some of the issues, but an occupational therapist, especially one that's actually trained in in sensory issues, is the most appropriate person to kind of evaluate and come up with a diagnosis and develop what we would call a sensory diet. Sensory diet doesn't have anything to do with food. It's simply like a kind of a group of activities or experiences that help an individual, kind of regulate their sensory system, keep the engine level running where it needs to be, and help keep their attention level where it needs to be. Excuse me. And the other important thing to keep in mind is for the sensory diet, really needs to be rather specific. So not only specific about the activities and the experiences, but also the timing of those, the frequency, maybe what the intensity and duration of those are. So it is important to have a professional that's trained come up with that sensory diet and help everybody implement it properly. So the goals there of that sensory diet, which I think we've already kind of addressed, but just more specifically, it's really important because it will help an individual with predictable sensory information to help with regulating and organizing that central nervous system. It also, in addition, will help with supporting social interaction, organizational skills, self-regulation, and self-esteem. It also might help with inhibiting or improving the regulation of sensory input within the daily routine. Because where we have hyper or hypoactivity activity in our students, they might need that additional support. And so, with processing and responding to sensory stimuli throughout the day, just as like the fire alarm, like we talked about earlier. I think, can everybody see this rather well on the screen? I'm looking over at my tech support here.
Hasn't moved over yet.
Okay.
A little bit of a lag here. We're almost.
It's just a sample sensory diet, and I hope everybody can see it relatively clearly because it is a little bit harder for me to read from where I'm at. But this is perfect because in it, not only is it giving examples of the activities, but giving more specific information regarding like the time that that activity needs to take place, as well as other like very specific details, because without those, what unfortunately can happen is you can decide, oh, well, Billy needs to be able to jump, like whenever he needs to regulate his system. Well, then Billy ends up jumping, 10 times throughout the day for like 10 minutes apiece, and it's too much sensory stimuli for him to jump that much. So without kind of these more specific details, then you can actually defeat the whole purpose of the sensory diet. So that's why it is important to have somebody specifically trained that can come up with an accurate sensory diet with all the right information and not just general ideas about how to help. So I think that might actually be everything we have.
We have using strategy.
Thank you. That is my fault. think this didn't come up for me. So when we're using the sensory strategies, like we said, it's really important, that we have a good plan. And then once we go to implement them, so finding the strategies that meet the need, like we already talked about, in the manner that's acceptable. So this example, the child starts to act up due to anxiety or sensory overload or an inability to sit when expected to. And then the next step is leave if possible, but know that this may not always be going to be possible. So what can you do to help? How can you minimize the problem? And then the next thing, find an alternative location to wait or give a tangible to increase or decrease sensory input. So this could be like blocking sensory input. And I feel like I've seen a lot of clients using the headphones. This has been a pretty popular strategy because of noise, or just getting into a more calm state, and I know everybody is tired of the fidget spinners. And I feel like it's a little unfortunate because I feel like sometimes the fidget spinners have been really useful for some of our kiddos, and it just became to be such a popular thing. It was banned by the schools. But there's a whole variety of fidgets. And in all honesty, like the best place to go is the dollar store to get like some of the greatest fidgets, for just $1. But even just massages or squeezes are a really big one, because sometimes we have quite a few clients that really like that deep pressure, and actually, not to get off on a tangent, but sometimes too, when you have somebody who's seeking out some deep pressure, that can even help with expanding communication, because you can encourage them, actually with any of these sensory strategies, you can encourage them to request whatever it is that they need, like the squeeze or the fidget. So strategies to adjust the engine level. Again, like, might want to think about the tactile. And I don't know how many people have seen the fidget cubes. I love the fidget cubes. I can't believe I didn't bring mine with me. But and again, like, I'll even use something as simple as a pen and just click my pen sometimes whenever I'm trying to concentrate, or when I'm anxious because I'm presenting, hint, hint, or and so some tactile. You might want to think about some auditory. I think it's well documented that even like classical music, well, it depends on the person, but a lot of times classical music is really enhanced people with studying. And then taste, obviously. Blowing bubbles can help with some oral input there. Eating spicy food, gum, Sour Patch Kids. I had one kiddo that ate Sour Patch Kids, I thought, until his tongue was going to bleed. Then when it comes to smell, there's lots of different strong smells, and everybody probably has their own preference, but some suggestions are like the lemon, peppermint, maybe lavender, rose, scratch and sniff Snickers, or Snickers, scratch and sniff stickers. And I know they even have, I think, the different flavored crayons and markers that I'll get all the time, Play-Doh. And then also, like, with the visual, dimming the lights. I know I've had different experiences with schools. Some schools have decided to buy the light covers to cover up the fluorescent lights, but it varies across school, because some, I think, places feel like it's a fire hazard, but that is possible. Sunglasses, just to dim the lighting. Lava lamp actually helps with enhancing the input. And then movement. It seems like it's really easy sometimes to get a little trampoline, maybe a bouncy ball that you just sit on and bounce, swing set, just even walking around sometimes. I've had teachers that have found like it's really easy just to give Johnny like an envelope to deliver to the office. And even though there's nothing really to deliver to the office. Like that's just that movement break really helps. So, okay, that is it now officially. So it's really is important to kind of pay attention to what sensory issues might be going on, to figure out what systems are involved and how those all work together and impact self-regulation of our bodies and how we can kind of adjust our engines depending on what kind of level of attention that we might need. And so it's really important. And again, I can't say this enough, as much as possible to have an expert involved who has some training, who understands how the sensory system works and how they might be able to put together some kind of sensory diet that would be beneficial for each individual. Because like we say about everybody, regardless of whether they're on the spectrum or not, each individual is their own person and has their own needs, and it's important that we pick the tools and strategies that work well for each individual person. So I think that's it. Do we have any questions?
We had a comment from someone who's, she said her son hates the lights in the gym. It could be the lights or it could be the sound that they make.
Yes.
And then we also had another comment, how can we get help in Ritchie County? So I will, Mary Kay, I will send you a private message and we will try to get something set up in Ritchie County for you.
That sounds good. Does anybody else have anything else?
I don't think so. And next Wednesday on April 11th at 5:30, we will do visual strategies.
Yes.
Anyone would like to join us again?
So I hope everybody heard that. And I mean, I'm so thankful that everybody decided to tune in. If there's, like I said, if there's anything, you guys have our private, you can private message us. And
yes, someone's asking if it's going to be available. It'll be on, you can rewatch the video. It'll be on the Facebook wall.
Okay.
So yes, it'll be available. You can go to our Facebook page to watch it.
I'm so excited you can rewatch this.
Yes, well, people can watch it.
But yes, you can. If anybody wants to tune in, it'll be posted on our Facebook wall.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Sarah.
Thanks.